haven't even started telling the story yet and I'm laughing. You guys are gonna have to forgive me because I'm gonna be laughing right through this story, because this one right here, I think, takes the cake of all the stories I have to share with you all. But this story right here is also the reason why I say, and this is something I would tell my nursing students, as a nurse, you have to be nosy. You gotta be nosy. If you really wanna find out what's going on with your patient, the family dynamics, like the story that the patient gave as to why they came into the hospital, you gotta be willing to ask questions and you gotta be nosy. You must have an inquisitive mind to be a high-profile nurse. So let's go ahead and get into this story, okay? I'm not wearing my contacts, so bear with me. I'm getting ready to go to class. This story took place a few years ago. I was not the nurse for the patient, but I worked on the unit, right? So the hospital that I was working at had a system where the patient was able to call down their breakfast, lunch, and dinner menu via the phone in the room. They can call and place their order and it would get delivered to them around, at the appropriate time. So there was this one patient who, he had a history of a stroke. So he did have some cognitive deficits and he was not able to place his own orders. On that specific unit I was working on, we had a dietary hostess who was thebomb.com. When I tell you that she was always on time with the trays, she was able to get the patient's orders, she anticipated almost all the needs of the patient. Excellent, excellent dietary hostess. So anyway, she would go in and get this patient's order for his breakfast, his lunch, his dinner, and then when she took his dinner order, she would get the breakfast for the following morning. So anyway, whenever she would go in, they would have a gentleman in the room with the patient. And at that time, when the budget was good, the hospital was allowing family members, relatives of family members are relatives, but caregivers, the hospital would allow for them to get a guest tray. I don't even think guest trays exist anymore because y'all know. Anyway. So when she would go in, she would take the patient's order and she would also take the order for the man sitting in the, for the patient's family or friend or whoever that was sitting in the room. So throughout the day, whenever she would deliver the trays, the guest would always be present. He would, receive his tray and he would tell her, don't worry, I'll set him up. I got it. It's no problem. So she was like, okay, cool. Anyway, this went on for 2 or 3 days while, she was taking the orders and providing the guest trays and everything like that. She started noticing, this is the dietary hostess now, not even the nurse. She started noticing that every time she came to pick up the empty trays, the man wouldn't be there, the guest would be gone. He would only be present mainly around ordering time and when the food got delivered. Any other time he was not there. And this dietary hostess, I told you, she was very good because she picked up on this, right? So, sorry, this is too much. This story is crazy. So this was going on for a couple of days. So finally, one day, she went to take the patient's order. She got the guest order, submitted it. Food came, they ate, she picked up the tray. So when she picked up the tray, she decided to ask the patient. She was like, where is the gentleman who's usually here with you? The patient was like, oh, he just left. So then she goes on to ask, what's your relation to him? Is that your brother? Is that your family? Is he your friend? Because I noticed that he's always here during mealtime and he's helping you and things like that. So what exactly is his relation to you? Why the patient gonna say, I don't know him? The patient said, I don't know that man. So she was like, what you mean you don't know him? He's been here for the past 3 days, sitting around with you, and helping you. You sure you don't know him? The man was like, no. I thought that the hospital didn't want me to eat alone, so they provided company to have my, to keep me company during the meals. I don't know that man. The patient ain't know the man. The man was coming, getting his breakfast, lunch, and dinner. When I'm talking about, he would be laid out in the recliner chair, ordering the food confidently, helping set the patient up, even coming out asking for ice, right? The patient was like, no, I've never seen that man before in my life. So the dietary hostess ended up reporting it, of course, to the charge nurse and to the manager. They got security involved, and long story short, they were able to track the man down, and lo and behold, him and the patient had no relation. The patient, he was not a friend of the patient or anything like that. So they banned him from the hospital. They told him not to return ever. The man was basically coming there to get his 3 square meals a day, because at that time, I'm not even gonna lie, the hospital food back then was really, really good. Like, I don't know who was chefing it up in the kitchen, but the hospital food was amazing. But that story right there, I always would tell my nursing students and use it as an example, because how come none of the nurses caring for that patient picked up on that dynamic? Not only did they not pick up on it, they never thought to ask. They never thought to ask, hey, the gentleman that's in the room with you, who's that person? No one asked him. So it just went, unrecognized, and no one seemed concerned about it. But it wasn't until the dietary hostess was like, wait a minute, he's here for every single meal, but when I come to pick up the tray, he's gone, but he's back when it's time to order. So she picked up on a pattern. But as nurses, we're also going into the room day in and day out. Somebody should have asked that patient, who is this man to you? Because he had to have been there, Because when mealtime comes around, that's when we usually administer insulin and things like that. None of the nurses was being nosy enough to inquire who that man was to the patient. For me, as a nurse working on the floor, at the bedside taking care of patients, I'm nosy. I'm asking all the questions. When I enter into a patient's room, now that I'm an experienced nurse and my nurse's intuition has been developed, I can pick up and I can sense a lot of the dynamics, but I always ask just to confirm, When I walk in, if there's a person in the room, hi, what relation are you to the patient? Especially if my patient is unable to communicate or they might have some cognitive deficits. I want to confirm, because as a nurse, I might say something, there's information I need to discuss with the patient. I just don't want to say it in front of anybody. And I also ask my patient if it's okay to have this conversation with this person present. Or sometimes I can just feel the energy and be like, you know what, I'm gonna wait until they leave. So I usually ask, so how long are you gonna be here? Are you gonna be here all day, or just half the day, or just for 5 minutes? Like, I need to know. Being nosy as a nurse is very necessary, because it's also how you dig and find out more information from the patient. A lot of nurses think that when they read the chart and they read through the history and the physical, like that's sufficient. No, I wanna know what happened. Like the moment you stepped out the shower and fell on the floor, I want to know what happened. I want to know who called 911, when 911 came up the stairs, what they said, what they did, how long was the ride to the hospital. All right, maybe not that much, but I like asking questions. Asking questions and being nosy as a nurse is also part of patient advocacy. It's also part of keeping your patients safe. Because oftentimes you will find out by asking and digging into certain parts of the patient's life, you will find out that this person lives at home alone. The stove isn't working, so they've been eating like microwave meals. Or you will find out things like the patient is a high risk for falls, and during the day, like there's no family member, there's no caregiver present with them, and they're not safe in that environment. Or you will find out things like patients will tell you things once they establish, so here's the thing. One of the first things you must do though, before you start prying into your patient's personal life, is establishing trust. And when I ask my patients questions about their home lives and things like that, I let them know one of the reasons why I'm asking is not only to help you, but I need to make sure that when we send you out that you're safe. And most patients are usually really receptive to that, because they understand that you genuinely care about their well-being. And just how you interact with them throughout the day, patients will become comfortable in telling you this is what's going on. And sometimes they trust you so much, they give you too much information and they hit you with the, but don't tell nobody I told you that. Don't tell the doctor. I ain't want him to know. And yet still I have to tell them, well, I can't withhold that information because I don't want for you to go home and something happens and then you're back in here or it ends badly for you. So certain information I don't keep from the doctor when the patients ask me, especially if it has to do with their safety. But that's one of the biggest lessons I think needs to be taught in nursing school, specifically in the clinical setting, when clinical instructors take their students to the hospital site or whichever site you go to. We have to start asking our patients questions. You go into the room, there's somebody sitting in there, ask them, what's your relation to this patient? Oh, you've been friends for 20 years. You'll find out so many things about patients if you just ask. I think a lot of times nursing staff don't understand that you're prying for a good reason. You're being nosy for a good reason. You're not being nosy to go back and gossip. You're being nosy because you want to make sure that your patient has the best outcome and that your patient is going to have a safe discharge. So that was my main reason for sharing that story, is just to show how we can miss things by not being inquisitive. And another reason why I shared this story is to show that when we talk about the multidisciplinary team, we're not just talking about physicians, nurses, therapists, case management, but also the housekeeper, the person delivering the food, the hostesses, the people that's going into the room, transporters, interacting with the patients. They're all part of the team because information that you might not be privy to, they might be privy to it, and they can come and update you and let you know what they observed, what they heard, what was overheard. Those staff members are part of the team, so you want to also have a good relationship with them, because look how quickly that dietary hostess was able to figure out something is not right here. Something is not right. And a lot of times in healthcare, you have nurses, you have physicians who are dismissive of non-clinical staff. Here's another story that I'm going to share with you. I was working at a large university teaching hospital here in Baltimore, and there's only 2 of them, so you'll have to guess which one. Large university teaching hospital. And by the way, I'm not a fan of large university teaching hospitals. Y'all can have that. That's for them young girls coming out of school. I ain't got time. Usually the culture tends to be very toxic. I ain't got time. So I like small hospitals. Give me a nice little community hospital. Put me in a nice little rural setting. That's me right there. But anyway, I was working at a large university teaching hospital as a float pool nurse. And I remember this day so vividly. I had to go to the stock room to get supplies. I was going to clean a patient up. Had to grab some chucks. And as I walked into the stock room, there's a fellow looking. He's looking on the shelf, looking all over, from shelf, looking. And I'm like, what are you looking for? He was like, oh, do you know where a scalpel is? So I'm thinking to myself, oh, he needs a scalpel. That means that there's probably a procedure that's going to be happening at the bedside. And I'm almost positive your attending physician is in the room waiting for you, and you ain't here taking all long because you can't find where the scalpel is. So I told him, no, I don't know where the scalpel is. But guess what was happening at the same time while him and I were in there? The guy who was in charge of stocking the room was in there stocking. The man in charge of stocking the supplies in that stock room was present and currently stocking. So if you went into that room and you were looking for an item and you couldn't locate it because you're not familiar with the stock room, what is the next best option? What would have been the next best thing for this fellow to do? So I'm like, I walked right over to the young man that was stocking the room and I said, what's up? I'm Kendra, one of the nurses. Where do you keep your scalpels in this stock room? He walked right over to a shelf, he bent down and he pulled it right out, handed it to me. And I went right over to the doctor and I said, here's your scalpel. I said, this gentleman that's stuck in this room knows this room like the back of his hand with his eyes closed. I said, he can find it in the dark. I said, why you didn't ask him? Oh, I didn't think to. Oh, you didn't think to. I wonder why. Because he's a stockroom person. He didn't know what a scalpel was. You didn't think that he was smart enough or intellectual enough to find you the scalpel that you needed for the procedure that's being done at the bedside, that your attendant physician is waiting on you for. You didn't think to ask the man who's stuck in the room, sir, you know, what's going on, my man? Where can I find the scalpel? Are you serious? But wait, you're in charge of patients? And you at some point in your career will be responsible for cutting somebody open, but you didn't have the common sense or you didn't have the wherewithal to ask the young man, hey, can you help me find the scalpel? That's crazy. The young man that was stuck in the room, after he gave me the scalpel and I handed it to the fellow and the fellow left, the young man said to me, he said, you know, I was watching him that whole time looking for it. He was looking. But he ain't asked me. And guess what? I wasn't going to offer help either. And I said, I don't blame you. I don't blame you one bit. Because he should have had enough common sense to know that you're in charge of this room and he should have asked you. I don't blame you. So let's not ever, also in nursing, especially for new nurses, new grad nurses, and I also need to address nurses coming from foreign countries because that's an influx. That's something that's happening more and more these days. Let's not underestimate our ancillary staff. They're just as much part of the team as the physician, as the physical therapist, as the care manager or the case manager. So utilize your resources properly, and don't forget, as a nurse, it is your job to investigate, to be nosy. To be a good nurse, you must have an inquisitive mind. You must question things. You must pay attention to your patients' patterns, to their mood, to how they're responding to certain things, how their mood can change if the husband visits or the wife visits. You need to be inquisitive, and you need to develop a relationship of trust with your patients to ask the questions so that way you can get the information to better help your patient and to ensure that your patient will be safe upon discharge from the hospital. So I am going to get ready to head out. Y'all know I can't see a thing. Where's my glasses? Okay, they're already clean. Can't see a thing. I'm going to head out because I have to get on the 295. Y'all know how that is with the traffic in the evening. And I will catch up with you all in another video. Thank you all for watching and listening.